Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT patch rundown video. The day has finally arrived as the mid-season update is here. There's a lot of changes in this 10-12 patch, so our analysts will be focusing on the relevant balance changes. A link to the patch notes will be in the description so you can see everything being added, removed, and changed for this massive update. With that said, let's dive on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video, and to start out, let's focus on the system changes coming in 10-12. Before we get into those, there's two quick changes to mention. First is Lilac Galaxy is being removed, and second is that there's a soft rank reset for the mid-season update. The mid-season update is removing 9 champions and adding in 14, which makes the total number of champions 57 instead of the previous 52. With this, they're bringing in a few tweaks to drop chances and champion pools, starting with the number of 3-cost champions being increased from 16 up to 18. What this does is it makes it possible for 2 separate players to have a 3-star 3-cost champion. There's a few champion drop chances being changed, with it mainly affecting 1, 3, and 4-cost champions. At level 4, Tier 1 is down to 55% from 60%, and Tier 3 is up to 15% from 10%. Level 9, the changes to Tier 3 are 30% from 25%, and to Tier 4, it's 30% from 35%. Overall, it's going to be harder to hit 3-star champions at any tier, though Tier 3 will have a slightly higher chance than others. A huge change coming in 10-12 is a shift to the gold values of selling champions. Tier 1 champions now sell for their full value, while other tiers sell for 1 less than their full value. What this means is selling a 3-cost 2-star champion will earn you 8 gold instead of the previous 5. This will likely have a large impact on the economy of the game moving forward. Lastly, Nico's help will now always work even if there's no more copies of the champion left in the pool. This is a huge change, as it no longer will be possible to block players from getting a 3-star champion if they have a Nico's help. Moving on, we have a bunch of trait changes to talk about. This won't cover every single change, and we'll focus instead on the relevant ones for 10-12. First up, we have a bunch of changes to Darkstar. The trait is now split into a 2-4-6-8 instead of a 3-6-9, making it easier to splash in. The bonus attack damage and ability power is being altered to 8, 16, 24, 32 from 20, 25, 30. Lastly, the largest change is that Darkstar champions now receive the buff when any ally dies rather than just when another Darkstar unit dies. That change is definitely the most relevant, alongside being able to splash in 2 Dark Stars, so you can have, say, Jin and Karma, and Jin will still be buffed from the rest of your board when they die. These changes should helpfully make the trait and champions more versatile. Infiltrator's getting slapped with a nerf bat, as the attack speed values are going to 40-70% from 50-75%. It is definitely a nerf, especially to the popularly played 2 Infiltrator. Opposite of Infiltrator, Mystic is getting buffed up in 10-12, as the magic resist values are going up to 51-25 from 35-105. 4 Mystic is now much more appealing, and splashing in 2 will always be more beneficial than previously. Sniper is now going to be a 4-piece moving forward, as there are now a total of 5 snipers. To adjust for that, they've lowered the damage bonus of 2 snipers from 15% to 10%, and the 4 sniper bonus will be 18%. Overall, it will be much easier to use this trait given that there's more champions to choose from. Quite a few small changes are coming to Star Guardian, as the values for the mana distribution are going to 25-40 from 30-50, and there's now a 9-piece version of the trait. The largest change is actually a bug fix, as the trait will now properly give the correct amount of mana per cast after the first one. With this, despite the nerfs to the amount of mana gained per cast, is an overall buff, as the trait will now function correctly. Vanguard is getting 2 changes. First, you'll be able to get up to 6 Vanguard, and second is a buff to the armor of 4 Vanguard, as it's going up to 300 from 250. While 6 Vanguard is unlikely to be that relevant, the fact that there's an extra Vanguard being added in and 4 is buffed makes the synergy much more flexible in 10-12. Okay, now we've reached the trait being changed the most in the mid-season update, Mech Pilot. Let's quickly list the buffs coming to the Super Mech itself. The Super Mech health is being increased, along with the armor and magic resistance, making the mech much tankier. Next is a small reduction to its mana, going from 225 down to 200. Lastly, an increase to the auto attack damage, attack speed, and overall spell damage of the Super Mech. By far the most relevant change for the Mech Pilot is that the pilot's health coming out of the Super Mech is now 35%, where it was previously 100%. This is a big change, as the rounds need to be almost almost entirely won with the super mech, as the pilots will be near death. The amount of buffs that the mech receives may compensate for this change, but we'll have to see moving forward what this does for mech builds. Now it's time to jump into the meat of the patch, champion changes. Before we get into the specific champion changes, we need to mention the overall changes coming in 10-12, which increases the armor, magic resist, or both for a good portion of the champion pool. This is meant to make your typical tank champions harder to kill, and you'll now have more options for your frontline. Let's get to the champions, beginning with Annie. Annie, along with the other mech pilots, is getting a lot of changes in 10-12. Her health is going up by 50, and her mana is being changed to 70 out of 140 from 75 out of 150. Her spell damage is being doubled at each star level, and the shield is going up to 400, 500, 700 from 270, 360, 540. These changes are going to make her much more powerful outside of the mech pilot, making her more feasible to play in sorcerer compositions. With an increased shield and health, she has a fair chance of being a decent frontline option as well. Rumble is the next mech pilot getting a lot of buffs. His health is going up to 900 from 800, and his mana pool is being reduced to 50 from 60. The largest change is to his damage, as it's going up to 500, 750, 1500 from 350, 500, 1000. Much like Annie, these changes make Rumble more valuable as a standalone champion outside of the mech, and with Demolitionist Charge being removed, he's a more valuable late-game unit to pair with Gangplank. Lastly, for the mech pilots, we have Fizz. His health is up to 700, a small attack speed buff, and his max mana is going down to 120 from 150. Like the other two, his spell damage is going up by a good amount, as it's now 450, 600, 5000 from 350, 500, 2000. While he's not a frontline champion like the other two, he should now be a much more of a threat to backlines with these changes. Next, let's go over some quicker changes, starting with Jace, who's getting his health increased to 850 from 750. Jace was already a great frontline option, and this solidifies him in that role. Shaco is having his attack damage increased to 75 from 70, and his spell bonus increased by 50% at each star level. With these buffs and the Dark Star changes, he may become much more flexible as a 3-cost mid-game carry. Jhin may be losing 10 attack damage as it's going from 90 down to 80, but to compensate, his attack speed now scales with star level, starting at 0.85 to 0.9 to a whopping 1.1. Next, we have changes to Ashe and Ezreal. We're pairing them together, as effectively the changes are similar for both of them. Overall, both of them are having their total mana and ability damage reduced. This will make it so that both of them should cast more often, providing more overall utility. Syndra is getting 2 small tweaks, with her mana pool reduced to 60 from 65, and her damage changed to 100, 125, 200 from 100, 150, 250. But alongside those, she's having the functionality changed for her ability, as it will now pick additional targets if the main target she's ulting dies and there's leftover damage. It's a nice change for her, making her potentially a more reliable carry. Lastly, before 5-cost changes, we've got Jinx. She's having her damage increased to 150, 250, 1000 from 125, 200, 750 for her rockets, but also receives a huge nerf as her rockets no longer fire with the blaster trait. This will definitely hurt her overall damage output and make her way less reliable as a carry. Aurelion Sol is getting big changes in 10-12, as he will now cast right away, launching 4 fighters with 2 per cast after that. By far the largest change to him is that his fighters will now drain 10, 25, 50 mana, which makes Aurelion way more relevant in the late game. Echo is also getting large changes, but there's 2 relevant ones to focus on. First, his ultimate now hits 5, 7, 20 times instead of just once per enemy, making him more useful later on in the fight, and his ability also slows the attack speed of enemies hit by 50% for 7 seconds. This is a huge slow, making him a potential counter to auto attack carries. And the last champion change is the Gangplank. His large area upgrade is having the radius reduced, and his mana is being changed to 70 out of 160 from 100 out of 175. While his first cast will happen a bit slower, this mana change should help him be more likely to cast a second time. Let's move on to relevant item changes coming in 10-12. First up is a new item, Chalice of Power, which replaces Chalice of Favor. It will now provide 30 ability power to nearby champions, the same way Zeke's does with attack speed. We'll have to see if this becomes relevant, as the tier plus cloak items always struggle with being balanced. Demolitionist Charge is being removed in 10-12 and is replaced by Battlecast Plating. The ramifications of the Demolitionist item being removed aren't as impactful with Kai'Sa being gone, but certainly hurts mech builds, as it will be harder to find a Demolitionist. This is also a nerf to Gangplank, as you'll need to rely on Rumble or Ziggs to now provide the Demolitionist buff for him. Giant Slayer will now deal 20% true damage, with that bonus being buffed to 80% if the enemy's max health is over 1750. These are huge changes to Giant Slayer and will likely make it a staple item for carries. Hextech Gunblade will now only heal from spell damage instead of all damage, making it more niche than it already was. To compensate, the healing is now 35% from 25%, but that may not be enough to make this item relevant. Another item getting huge changes is Infinity Edge, as it will now grant a 100% critical strike chance with only a 20% increase in damage. Overall, this makes it a much more interesting item, though whether it's better or not remains to be seen. Rapid Fire Cannon is returning to its former glory, as it will now make it so attacks of the item holder don't miss. With the popularity of Quicksilver and Trap Claw, this is a nice quality of life change for the item. Seraph's had a balancing issue for a while, so to fix that, it is now being replaced by a similar item, Blue Buff. Blue Buff will have the same effect, with setting the caster's mana to 20 after a cast, but it will now be unique, so wave goodbye to stacking multiples of this item. Interestingly, Red Buff is being changed to 10% over 4 seconds from 25% over 10 seconds, while Morellonomicon is being unchanged. This now separates the two items further, making it so each can be balanced individually instead of together. And the last item getting altered is Warmogs. Instead of providing health regen, it now gives a flat 600 health, making the total health of the item a whopping 1000. No regen will certainly hurt the appeal of this item, but there are specific uses of it popping up, most notably in protector builds, as the shields of that trait are based on health. There's two bug fixes to talk about before we go, starting with the change to Runin's Hurricane. The extra bolt from Runin's will no longer get the extra damage from the sniper trait, which is quite a nerf considering Runin's was one of the core items for Jhin. The second bug fix is the removal of the mana bug. The mana bug is where you had a tier on a champion and made an item during the round to get an extra boost of mana on that champion. It's been a bug for quite some time, and with a lot of high-level players using it, it's likely to be noticed that it's gone. But it's overall good that it's gone, as it's been an issue since set 1. That has been the end of today's mid-season patch rundown. There were a ton of changes, so be sure to check the official notes to familiarize yourself with the big changes coming in 10.12. Let us know in the comment section below what changes you like the most. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.